Okay. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa barak wasallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So those who are not familiar, on Monday nights, we've been looking at a text. It's called the 40 Hadith of Imam Nawawi. And we've been looking at this since last year. So to give you an idea, in the course of this last year, we've gone through in a lot of detail, talking about just the first 10 hadith so far. And the last time we did this session, we started looking at hadith number 11. So if people want to take a minute and just pull up on their phones or anything else you have with them, you just Google Nawawi Hadith. The text is the 40 Hadith of Imam Nawawi. We're looking at Hadith number 11 that says, leave that which is doubtful for that which is not doubtful. Da'ma yuribuk ila ma la yuribuk. Which I was just going to ask somebody to read, but I just said it out loud. Great. So once somebody has it up, maybe you can read the hadith in its entirety, the English, the Arabic, with the transmitter, just for the kind of barakah of it. And these are very concise hadith that have a lot of deep meaning to them. So if you've missed the first kind of set of sessions on it, you can find all those on our YouTube channel. We also have a podcast that's up. Last week when we were looking at this hadith, we just looked at the narrator of the hadith, the grandson of the Prophet, Hassan bin Ali radiallahu anhuma. Just to recap a little bit, we talked about that Hassan radiallahu anh was born in the 3rd year after Hijrah. So after the Muslims left from Mecca and went to Medina, he was born 3 years into the migration from Mecca to Medina. And that was a 10-year period. So he was very young at this time. We talked about how this hadith then must have been something that he heard at a time when he was able to have the faculties of both like understanding and memorizing these things. So the Prophet is telling this statement, leave that which is doubtful for that which is not doubtful, not in an early experience of Islam, but in a latter period of Islam, right? Still giving these principles and insights. And then we focused a lot on how in the hadith, before it gets to the text, what we call the matan, that Hassan radiallahu anh is referred to in a very endearing way as the Rayhan of the Prophet of God, right? It's kind of like sweet fragrance, the one that the Prophet loves. So pretty much the last time we met, we didn't get into the text so much as we talked about just why is it important to have elders in your life who express affection and care for you, right? That the Prophet of God tells his grandson that he loves him. That there's another hadith where a man sees the Prophet kissing his grandson, and he says, I have 10 sons, and I don't kiss any of them. And the Prophet says that there's no mercy for one who has no mercy, right? No rahmah for one who has no rahmah. And rahmah is not just mercy. And we want to understand this, again, as a summation from the last week, that when we live in a supremacist society, right? Anti-blackness, whiteness, we think about mercy. We think about it through the prism of kind of what we're socialized with here. I go through a red light, I'll get a ticket. And I'll tell the guy, please be merciful to me. That's not what rahmah is. Rahmah has its own element of softness, its own element of kindness, its own element of love and compassion, in addition to mercy. All of those things blend together. It's a very key part of our tradition, right? The first narration that many of us are taught when we study hadith is hadith al-rahmah, the hadith of this thing of rahmah that says, Ar-Rahimuna yarhamuhum ar-Rahman, irhamu man fil ard, yarhamkum man fis sama, that the merciful one is merciful to those who are merciful. Be merciful on the earth. The one who is in the heavens will be merciful to you, right? May Allah make us from the merciful. So in that hadith, in this hadith, last time what we talked about a lot was what's the impact of having people in your life that express that kind of love and compassion, and how it's embedded in our tradition that when anybody is studying this 11th hadith of the hadith collection of Imam Nawawi, or they read it in other books, they're reading as part of the hadith that the Prophet has this love for his grandchild, right? Again and again and again. And then you think about in your own experiences, how much is validated through cultural norms and practices that says, well, we come from this part of the world where fathers don't tell their children that they love them, that we only hug each other on the day of Eid. There's no expression of affection or gratitude. And you can't say that love is not an integral part of this tradition. But to understand why and recognizing that we have Al-Hasan bin Ali radiallahu anhuma, who is now the narrator of this hadith, who he and his brother Hussein radiallahu an become so moved through growing up in the madrasa of the Prophet of God that they're in a place where they feel the courage now that enables them to do what they do in adulthood, and even in a state of adolescence, that can only come when you have people who are elder to you expressing that in terms of affection and gratitude. And when you juxtapose it to the reality of people who might not have the presence of that positive reinforcement, but they have overt negative reinforcement, right? Our Prophet, we're taught by his wife, radiallahu ta'ala anha, lam yadrib Rasulullahi imra'atan wala ghulaman wala waladan qat, that the messenger of God never struck a woman or a servant or a child ever. It's not part of our religion. Anybody who validates abuse in any way or sets a standard that says, just because I bore you into this world, that means that I have authority to be able to determine and dictate however it is that you choose to live, that's not what our religion is about. It doesn't fundamentally flow with what it is that we're taught through prophetic tradition and the lived experience of this. So how many people do you know who as children, they had to harness and give abode to adult emotions in their heart that no child should ever have to experience? The narrator of this hadith, anytime someone studies it, they know that his elders love him. And understanding that not as a side point, but understanding that in the prism of how it is that we then give continuity to generational traumas that we can justify and validate. My mother talks to me like this because she is a product of colonization. My grandfather was like this because we are refugees. We have in our history the realities of enslavement. May Allah make it easy. We can understand all of these things, but we're still responsible for the consequences of our feelings. This is a community, if you're new to it, where we don't hesitate in telling each other that we love one another, that I love each of you as my sisters and brothers. And you have to understand that the value of love is not rooted just purely in romantic love or physical love or these manifestations of love. And we talk about mahabba and the way we understand it through the Quran and the Hadith. Loving someone can give you a certain strength that you can't ever imagine you could possess other than having that genuine love for someone else. And feeling someone's love, it can give you an unbounded courage that once you have that, the bold audacity through which you can make decisions confronting fear is not something that anything else can do. The Prophet's love for his family, his grandchildren, for his people, it motivates him to not stop taking on anything for 23 years of prophethood. It's very different also because it's not a love of dunya, a love of materialistic things. That I love to have some portion of this world is really just a different way of saying I'm afraid to losing some of it. That's why I don't live to my potential. And this is what we talked about last time in relation to this hadith, that in its initial place, when it's talking in the chain of transmission, it identifies that the Prophet has this love for his grandson. Why is this something that gets iterated again and again whenever this is taught? And to think about it. We're going to talk about the crux of the text of the hadith today, but I love if anybody who has it pulled up now can read it for us. You can read the Arabic and the English in its entirety. So not just like what we call the matan, the text of it, that says, leave that which is doubtful for that which is not doubtful, but from the chain of transmission, either the English or the Arabic, if anybody has it. Who'd like to read it? Yeah, go ahead.
عن أبي محمد الحسن بن علي بن أبي طالب سبق رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وريحانته رضي الله عنهما قال حضرت من رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم دع ما يريبك إلى ما لا يريبك رواه الترمذي النسائي وقال الترمذي حديث حسن صحيح.
Jazakallah khair. Does somebody want to read the English? Does anybody have it in front of them? Yeah, go for it.
On the authority of Abu Muhammad ibn Ali ibn Abi Talib, may Allah be pleased with him, the grandson of the Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, and the one much loved by him, who said, I memorized from the Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. Believe what makes you doubtful and what does not. Related by Tirmidhi and Muslim.
Great. So this hadith is an example one, before we get into the text, of just like how beautifully deep the Prophet of God's teachings are. And you have to understand it not purely through a legalistic framework only. A lot of times when we think about religion, we only know how to ask questions in the prism of like fiqh and am I allowed to do this? Is this permissible? When what we're really getting to the crux of is like, hey, my heart is hurting. Something's not really feeling so well within me. We're not meant to be a religion that focuses only on that which is outward or that which is apparent. That in and of itself is actually antithetical to what this religion's about. But we see things through a multidimensional prism. We do have practice and ritual, which you can call Islam, not like the name of the religion, but just like the doing of Islam, right? These are verbal nouns. They're gerunds. So you do like submission. That's Islam. We also have Iman, which is a robust theology that we understand not as regurgitated, memorized creed, that there's a building a block down. It's a Department of Islamic Studies that has a ton of professors on faculty that likely know our creed better than most of us, but they don't have Iman in it. That's the distinction, right? A third, we have a deep spiritual tradition rooted in principles of ihsan. Like we try to not just see what is apparent, but we use it as a mechanism of ascertaining meaning. Do you know? In spirituality, if we gave it a baseline definition, that's what it is. It's my capacity to take meaning from the environment around me. Then we encapsulate this in a dimension of time, right? And the second hadith in this hadith collection goes through these points. The hadith Jibreel talks about these things in detail. This gives us an opportunity to understand something really unique about the Prophet of God, and that he's an amazing communicator using very little words to give like deep meaning and principles to live life by. When we're taught this hadith, we're taught it in a lot of different frames, and we're going to talk about it in a lot of different frames. But if you've never been here before, we also encourage everybody to talk to each other. So as a preface to it, that we can learn from one another, which your job is not to correct or remedy somebody else's insights. You don't want to speak only if you feel like you have the most correct thing to say or most profound thing to say, or hesitate from sharing thoughts because you're worried you're saying something wrong. How we expand and understand our religion more deeply, and not just at a surface level so that it's present to inform decisions and choices, is that we start to feel a sense of actual connection and ownership to it, right? You're not Muslim because your parents were Muslim. That's not how Islam works. Sociological identity variables of religion can be something that we become accustomed to, but this is a religion that you actually have to buy into whether you believe in it or not. In informative periods of our identity, it allows for us in unsheltered modes to start now thinking about what we think about and how we actually have belief and conviction in something. And it's going to be central to this because that's going to be what awakens as you're walking through the streets of New York that are filled with a lot of different fitna. People who are not grounded or rooted in anything, that can then validate egocentricity, that simply because I want it, that's enough for me to say I deserve it. It doesn't matter who I have to take it from or who else doesn't have anything at all, as long as I get for me what is mine. And I feed myself and make decisions purely through parts of me that are physical, then my heart's not in a place where it can give me insight that, hey, you should leave this thing because there's doubtfulness to it in pursuit of something that is not doubtful. Does that make sense? And the principle in and of itself can become a remedy for anxiety. Certitude gives me something concrete. And it's not just in the frames of ritual and practice, because our religion tells us with certitude that not gossiping is better than gossiping. Not lying is better than lying. Being honest and truthful is better than both of those things. Being racist, not good. Being somebody who has respect for people of all backgrounds, good. Leave that which you have doubt around. Should I be with these people who are bringing me to a place that is an absence of ethics? Or should I go towards people who call me to the best version of myself? And that's not a frame that is broken down as non-Muslim and Muslim, because some Muslims are idiots, right? They weaponize religion in a way where they walk into a space and they believe that they are entitled to assess somebody up and down based off of what? Just what you see? The accent that you hear? Some of you in this room have never prayed behind somebody that has a different skin color than your own. And you hesitate, you have challenges. I don't think that this is good, but I'm still going along with it. No, leave that which is doubtful for that which is not doubtful. The principle applies itself in a lot of different ways, and we want to think about it expansively. Da' ma yuribuk ila ma la yuribuk. It has now some manifestations, but we want to get into like what this is actually saying from just purely a language standpoint. The Prophet of God makes commands or prohibitions. We would automatically assume that that means that that must be like obligatory or like impermissible. And you can read the Quran in this way as well, that if it's a command, it must mean that you have to do or not do. But it doesn't work that way so simply. Here, if you don't leave something that's doubtful for that which is not doubtful, if it's a command and you don't do it, then that means you're doing something haram. But that's not what this is categorized to be. Leaving that which is doubtful for that which is not doubtful is seen as a recommendation, not as an obligation. You can imagine how difficult life would be that if every time you had doubt, you didn't step away from it, you were doing something that's impermissible. So it doesn't suffice that just because it's in the imperative, that in and of itself constitutes that it is a fard. Does that make sense? And there's verses in the Quran that are like this too, right? There's a verse that says, if you were to recite the Quran, fasta'idh billah, then seek refuge, do the ta'awudh, like with Allah, right? A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. But that's not seen again as an obligation, because that means that every time you read Quran, if you don't say A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, if that was a command that made it obligatory, you're doing something haram. Do you see what I mean? So you don't want to think about it just in those ways. The recommended part to this is for people like us, you and I come upon something doubtful, I'm going to try my best to leave it for that which is not doubtful. In some instances, though, it becomes something that's obligatory, right? If I'm walking down the street and something like just splatters on me that is considered to be ritually impure. Do you know what I mean? Right? Like, you know, in some understandings of like, you know, urine or vomit or whatever else. Do you see what I mean? But I don't know where it fell. I'm not required to wash it off other than in the place that I know that it fell down. So if I got, you know, some type of like filthy substance that is religiously considered filthy. Do you know what I mean? Right? So it's not like, oh, you know, Fiza sneezed and her boogers flew onto my arm. That's not considered ritually impure. Do you know? Maybe Fiza's are, right? But for the rest of us, it's not. So I don't have to wash like the entirety of my shirt if by chance like urine got just on the cuff of it and I know that. But what if something splattered on me and I don't know where it went in its entirety? Do you see what I mean? So at that juncture, like I can't have the impurity on my being, but I don't know where it is, then I got to wash the whole shirt. Does that make sense? Do you get what I mean? You can think about this now in a different frame because we don't want to focus on it just through that aspect. Leave that which is doubtful for that which is not doubtful can pertain to us in that recommended capacity. Other than some of our teachers, they say, if you have a position of authority. So if I'm going to be standing on the mimbar, if I'm choosing to father children into this world, if I'm in a place where I adopt some position of authority, you are presiding over some student club at this place. You take on the task of organizing Muslims in your company. You have the role that gives you leadership in some capacity. And this is not a tradition that is just about formalized understandings of leadership, because leadership in our tradition is distinct from authority, right? Authorities, for example, are the type of people who they decide to lay off thousands of people in their workforce so they can retain their large salaries in economic downturns. That's not leadership, that's authority. That's the type of person who knows that my workforce comes in every morning in a state of anxiety, wondering if I'm going to be let go today. It's not leadership, it's authority. Leadership in our tradition is exerted through a servant-based model of care and affection, that you love people to such an extent that you know that doing for them compels you and motivates you to be the best version of yourself. And you leave that which is doubtful for that which is not doubtful, because in that category now, like people will look to you to set a standard of what it is that should be exemplified. Do you see what I mean? Does that make sense? And in that prism, we start to think and reflect, not in a burdensome mode that we experience quite often in many of the spaces that we frequent. You and I don't represent from inequitous systems that impose upon us a narrative that removes our name and identity and a sense of anxiety around being a part of this beautiful religion, that I suddenly represent every single Muslim in the billions around the world always. And I have to know every answer to every single thing. That's the way people create psychological anxiety to make you be in a place where you walk on eggshells. You want to push that nonsense out of the side and on your own terms recognize for yourself, like, hey, in what capacities can I actually exemplify what it is that I know of this tradition? But the majority of us are people who exist in a frame where we don't have that leadership capacity. Leadership is not equated just to religious leadership in our tradition. We have people who can take on forms of leadership in a lot of different ways, but we set the standards and the examples. And you think about it now in terms of people that we can juxtapose this to. People that are given stature and popularity. Not hating on anybody, but just think about it. Think about what it is that you see in terms of now, like the publicness of people's lives and how it is that they put things out there that they fundamentally just don't care who it is that is watching them do the things that they do. They're in a place where it is pushed out forward. Our tradition is telling us that no, you have to do it. And sometimes when you can't do it just for yourself, when you can build that love for somebody else, and it says, I'm leaving this behind out of my care and affection for you. That I want to be the best version of myself so that I know that your eyes that are taking from me, they're not going to have continuity to ill practice, but towards the best of practices as possible. You see what I mean? My son is going to learn from me what it means to be a man, a husband, and a father, just as my daughter is going to learn from me what it means to be a husband and a father, and how it is that I relate to their mother in front of them. Leave that which is doubtful for that which is not doubtful. So the Prophet ﷺ, he tells his wife that he loves her. He kisses her before he exits the home and when he enters it. There's no doubt that he loves his wife. And in a leadership capacity, he knows that all of us are going to be in a place where we understand these things. He smiles at those that he knows and those that he does not know, even where his life is in straight difficulty. He's buried many of his children, seeing them die before he passes, a hardship that only parents who have gone through that can understand. May Allah grant them ease. He has the stresses and anxieties and challenges of this world upon his shoulders. People are persecuting, creating great tribulation. He's still known as the smiling one. Abu Dhar and Bilal radiallahu an, they are arguing with each other on one occasion, going back and forth. Emotions escalate until Abu Dhar calls Bilal the son of a black woman. Both of them get silent because he says this in a derogatory way. And Abu Dhar himself is a black Arab. What he's calling Bilal essentially is an African, as if that's something wrong. When the Prophet hears that this happens, he says, all of us are the children of a black woman, referring to Hajar, peace be upon her, leaving no room for doubt. Leave that which is doubtful for that which is not doubtful. Compassion, generosity, kindness, these are things with certitude that are here. إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِيُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ, that I was sent only to perfect ethical conduct. So leave that which is doubtful for that which is not. In a leadership capacity, the Prophet is not just passing on to you postures in prayers or guidelines for charitable distributions, but inwardly and outwardly is setting a mode of understanding as to how to be. A young man comes to the Prophet of God and says, Ya Rasulullah, you have to make zina halal for me. You can imagine in whatever local masjid you grow up in, if a young man, like any of these guys sitting here, walked into the masjid and said, you have to let me fornicate, what would people's reactions be? Some of the companions said, don't say these things. The Prophet brings the young man closer to him and he engages him in conversation. Because he's not looking for an academic answer. Is this permissible or not? He's saying, this is what I struggle with. The Prophet says to him simply that, would you want someone to do this with your mother? He says, well, messenger of God, of course not, right? Like, may my parents be sacrificed for you. What he's saying in the Arabic is that I love you, Ya Rasulullah. Like, I would die for you. He goes on through it again. Would you want this for your aunt, for your sister? And he says, of course not, O messenger of God. And the Prophet brings this young man close to him, puts his hand on his chest, and makes dua for him that Allah grants him ease in his struggle. In the entirety of the hadith, the Messenger ﷺ does not say the word haram once. He does not tell him that, don't you know this is haram? But he's able to convey to him a teaching with a recognition of where he's at, and he helps him to grow from this. Do you see what I mean? Leave that which is doubtful for that which is not doubtful. This is what we have when we draw from the best of teachers' examples. And you can't get there if all you think Islam is about is just a set of do's and don'ts, rights and wrongs, a set of rules. It's a religion that's much deeper than that. In spaces like this, it'll afford you an opportunity to think about it now in some different frames so that it creates guiding principles that actualize themselves in decisions and choices. Leave that which is doubtful for that which is not doubtful. We're going to talk about it a little bit more, but if you can turn to the persons next to you just so we can get talking, and I'm not talking at you so much. What are you taking away from this so far? What's coming up? And then we'll come back and discuss, but go ahead. If you don't know the names of the people next to you, exchange some names, and then we'll kind of come back and discuss. Thanks, huh? I'm fasting. Yeah, I'm okay. Exactly okay. Thank you.
Yeah, we were talking about caring and being compassionate. Like he said that so making sure you're not doing it in a way, but having the right intention. I think I just said that you're caring. You don't have to play, saying right off the gate. I guess like you will call me Hassan A lot of people used to have
Okay. What are some of the things that are coming up for people so far? What are we taking away? Shh. We can come back. Let's try to come back. So what are some of the things that people are taking away? Yeah, go ahead. Shh. Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
We're thinking in terms of more of a personal context,
Yeah.
especially like if you're new to something, and that applies to even roles of leadership as well. That if you've been doing something in a wrong way and you've been taught by a new person, let's say I come to this class and you're telling me, oh, this isn't the right way. The right way is this, but I haven't done this before, so I'm a bit hesitant. I'll probably doubt that as well. So how do you do something new when you're thinking of it in this way that, oh, leave that is doubtful and do what is not?
Well, this is a very diverse community, and you have to understand that it's a sign of spiritual immaturity to assume that we know every opinion on every matter, right? There's very few things that are like definitively only done one way. And this hadith is not applicable in certain regards. Like there's no ijtihad, like where you're struggling with text, where there's definitive like text, right? So don't eat pork means don't eat pork. Do you know what I mean? And if you walk up to somebody and they're like, well, you know what, man? I think it means that you can eat pork. And you're like, no, like don't eat pork means don't eat pork. There's not really ways around that, right? But there are certain things that are embedded in our tradition that necessitate understanding that just because I don't know doesn't mean that that's the variable that gives it certitude only in my way of approaching it. Do you see what I mean? And you're going to meet Muslims in this space that practice Islam within the broader framework of what is theologically and legislatively allowed in Islam that falls into these categories of different of opinions. Allah just speaks instruction to us in different ways. And that's where you want to ask people who know. And that's why you also want to only talk when you know. Do you know? Does that make sense? Right? Like I used to be a writing TA when I was an undergrad at the New York City Technical College, which is across the street from Tandon. And I was working there in the winter and I walked in to pray. It was very cold. And I made wudu and I had taken off my socks and washed my feet and then dried my feet and then put the socks back on. And I walked into their prayer room. There was a guy leaning against the wall who, you know, was essentially sitting there like that was like his prayer room. Do you know what I mean? And he looked at me and didn't really say anything. And then some other guy walked in and he said, like, hey, let's pray together. And then we prayed together. And after we finished praying, the guy who was sitting on the ground said to the guy who was praying with me in Urdu that this guy is wearing his socks, which means he wiped over his socks, which means he didn't wash his feet during his wudu, which means his prayer doesn't count. So you should repeat your prayer. So I spoke back to him in Urdu and said, hey, I understand Urdu. And then his face kind of dropped a bit. And I said, for your information, I did take my socks off and wash my feet, but also, what business is it of yours, right? This is hadith. من حسن الإسلام المرء تركه ما لا يعنيه. That from the beauty of one's Islam is to leave that which does not concern them. I mean, like, mind your business, right? But you can see the challenge that, one, there is valid opinion that people will say you can wipe over like a regular kind of cloth sock, right? I might not follow that opinion, but it doesn't mean that there aren't people who do espouse that opinion. And you become limited when you're thinking about this only in externals. Do you know what I mean? So there's no doubt in the fact that I can always know more. And if I go in and my knee-jerk reaction is to always make a comment, likely it's not your heart that's guiding you, but the nafs is getting in the way. You shouldn't want to always have an opinion on everything or have to say something because you're accountable for every word. Do you know? What if I didn't understand this guy's language? And every time I came to that prayer room, nobody wanted to pray with me because I was the guy that this man who thought he was the dawn of his musalla, like, had the ability to do this. And this is why, like, most people turn away from religion, from quote unquote religious people. You know, you don't want that to be kind of where it's at. As you get to navigate and meet people more, you'll be able to understand that there's different ways of doing certain things. On definitively established text, right, which we call qat'i text, there's not like ijtihad. Do you see? But there's a lot of things that are dhanni. They're not like decisive, they're probabilistic. And so there can be different opinions on things. We don't want to be intellectually dishonest. And if you find something that works for you or you kind of follow within a certain methodology, that's fine. But it's not the place that just because I'm not familiar with it means that it's not true. Does that make sense? Right? What else are we taking away so far? Yeah.
I like the point how you said that, like, leaving the doubtful for the undoubtful, like, that's really too is like a remedy for anxiety and things of that nature. It kind of solidifies the fact that, like, Islam is not just a religion but a way of life, and all of our practices can help with not just the deen but things that you want to do in the dunya as well. So, like, leaving the doubtful for the undoubtful can help not only with your deen, but like in situations in school or with handling relationships with people. So, like, anything is very transferable through many different things in our lives, and I think that was very powerful.
Yeah, 100%. Other thoughts? Other takeaways? That's it, just those two things? Amazing. Yeah, go for it.
I guess being a man goes beyond just being able to provide for a family. It's also showing affection for your family.
Yeah, and if you came to the Sirah class we do on Wednesdays, I showed people a list of things that were just qualities of manhood from like Hadith, as well as like sayings of the companions, the generations that came after, on masculinity. When we were talking about like Hamza radiallahu an and Umar radiallahu an and their embrace of Islam, and how we sometimes think about them just in like physical capacities alone and not through like the compassion, the gentleness, the tenderness that's there. And we're like transformed through this religion in these ways. Do you see what I mean? The goal isn't to be just Muslim in this space. The goal is to do what you do in this space to then inform that you're still Muslim when you walk out of this space in a world that it's really hard to be Muslim. People worship themselves and they could care less on how they treat people in all different kinds of ways, right? And we don't want to be like that. You know, you want to have care and compassion unconditionally as best as you can. And these kinds of things help. What does doubt do when you experience it in your heart? You know, when you're in a moment where you don't have certitude or something, anxiety comes up, right? It's hard to walk into a new space and you don't know everyone and you got to just start talking to people. That feeling that like flutters in your stomach of just stress and anxiety, these are the kinds of things that we can analogize here, you know, to recognizing that sometimes my heart is going to signal to me that this isn't the space for me. Like, these aren't the people I should be around. What they're encouraging me towards is not going to be what I know is good for me in the immediate as well as the long term. Do you see what I mean? دع ما يريبك إلى ما لا يريبك. We have within the legal maxims of this tradition one that says certainty is not lifted by doubt. Al-yaqeen, like overt certainty, la yazulu, is not lifted bishak, by doubt. And this is another way where anxiety sets in. Do you know? I don't know if I have wudu or if I don't have wudu. Do you know what I mean? If you know you made wudu and you know nothing happened that would break your wudu, our tradition teaches us you go with the fact that you made wudu. Do you know? That's like what you base things off of. Do you see? In moments where you have doubt and you're trying to figure it out, you go with what's certain. So if you're praying and you're supposed to pray like X number of rak'ahs and then you lose track of it, doing one more is better than doing one less, right? You're making tawaf around the Kaaba on Umrah and you don't know, like, did I do 7 circuits or just 6 circuits, right? Doing 8 is better than doing 6. So you go with what's certain from where you know you left off, and then you add to it where necessary. Does you see what I mean, right? But this principle of certainty versus doubt necessitates understanding like these are two things that are opposites. Certitude in our tradition is rooted in like a deep, resonant faith. You know, the way you walk into this room and you hit the light switch and you know the lights are going to turn on. You're going to go down the hall and there's a water fountain and you push the button and you know water's going to come out, right? Why? Why do you think those things? Why do you believe that when you walk into your home, your apartment, your dorm, the electricity is going to work? Everybody has reasonable faith. Yaqeen is having faith in the things that we are told to have iman in, but also like a certitude, a certainty, the way that you know the lights are going to turn on when you hit the light switch, you bring certitude into your life that you know you are not the best version of yourself when you are interacting in certain environments. You know with certitude that there are people who have demonstrated again and again that they just don't have your best interest in mind. They're toxic, they're negative. Put your heart in the presence of those that have a care for your heart, gentleness, softness. May Allah surround us with hearts that are soft and tender. You know with certitude that you're going to walk into spaces where people just don't believe what you believe. You're going to sit next to people every day. Their decisions and choices in upward mobility are not going to be rooted on principles or ethics, but a willingness to compromise on it. That's how a lot of industries function. You go in the private sphere, the political sphere, and how people increase in their upward mobility in many companies is based off of an absence of emotional intelligence, a willingness to do things that are unethical, to compromise it, not exercise upon it. You don't want to pretend or like be naive. Are you really that surprised when they don't say the word Palestine? They're telling you who they are, but you should already know that that's who they are. Who are you in relation to this? When you're in a place where you are putting in what? That just because something is law doesn't make it just. Don't let certitude be lifted by doubt. And it's not just applied at the level, again, that is rooted in what's legalistic. You don't want to think about this just in terms of, did I make wudu and did I break it or not? But in the broader sphere of how it understands various things. Should I be eating at this place or not? Should I be engaging in this kind of environment or not? Abu Bakr radiallahu an, he eats in a place, and then the person who is giving him this food has indication that the root of the revenue that was purchasing the food came from potentially a haram source that was acquired before someone's embrace of Islam. And when he hears this, he induces vomiting because he doesn't want to have anything that's potentially a part of his body that will fuel and nourish it that comes from a doubtful source. And the hadith that we looked at before this, where we talked a lot about different things in this regard, my not knowing can only get me so far. How many people have to die in sweatshops for me to wear the brand logos that I wear? And the absence of certitude can't be rooted in a willfully blissful ignorance. You have to know the way that you turn on the lights and have that certitude that there's fundamentally just garbage people in the world. And we can't be amongst them. And then we put certitude in what is there, right? Certainty is not lifted by doubt. The akhirah is better than what is in front of us, right? وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى. Like what is forthcoming is better than what is here and now. So leave that which is doubtful for that which is not doubtful. How did the deeds and decisions of this day demonstrate a recognition that one day, with certitude, I will stand in front of the divine? And that recognition of it embedded now in a sense of understanding. You could dress how somebody else dresses. You could eat what somebody else eats. You can't believe something just because somebody else believes it. It has to come from within. The things that we put confidence in fundamentally are not equated to absolute certitude. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to get a job. I'm going to get married. I'm going to have some babies. We're going to get a house and everything's going to be great. No, for some people, money is a blessing, a ni'mah. And for some people, it's a fitna, it's a trial. For some people, marriage is a blessing. For some people, marriage is a trial. For some people, children are a blessing. For some people, children are a trial, right? The only thing that is categorically always a ni'mah, a blessing, is the gift of Iman, the gift of Islam. Everything else has capacity to go in either direction. Don't make certain things that are not certain. They then bleed into other things that create problems. And your life goes in pursuit of things that you believe will give you contentment, but in reality, they yield just complacency and quite often a lot more stress and difficulty. And a hadith like this is applied to people differently. So what might be certain for me will be different for you in certain regards. The akhirah is absolute. That's certitude. It is better than what is here. But what might be something that creates a challenge for me might not be the same as for you. And we might have to move forward in those regards a little bit differently than other people might have to. Da'ma yuribuk ila ma la yuribuk. It might look differently for me than for you. It might not be the same for me as it is for you. But when I go to the place of certitude, with still a sense of malleability, right? I know for certain that I function better when I sleep this many hours. I know for certain that praying Fajr is better than not praying Fajr. I know for certain that engaging in certain things will be better than not engaging in certain things across the board. But some of how it applies to me particularly is not going to be the same as it applies to somebody else. And as part of the process, I get to know myself better and self-actualize better and see myself as a whole individual. So I'm not trying to just replicate somebody else's steps or walk in somebody else's journey and path. It's meant to be my path and my journey and my understanding of it. You see what I mean? Da'ma yuribuk ila ma la yuribuk. How often do you have doubt in your relationship with the divine? I did this thing, it means that Allah must be upset with me and not want me to be a part of this religion. Is there certitude in the reality of Allah's rahmah? Or do you believe that there's actually an action you can undertake that God's rahmah is not big enough to actually forgive? And that's where shaitan gets us, not in the slip up or the mistake, but through it to get us to believe that we now somehow cannot have a relationship with the divine. And you're going to come to these places where you are going to have to measure out through subjective conviction how you demonstrate an embrace of what is certain versus what is not. And how do I buy into it when nobody else is going to be the one that's waking me up in my bed saying, hey man, now it's time to do this or do that. You could walk through these streets and have no accountability and blend into crowds of millions of people. But if you don't exert conscious thoughtfulness in the decision prior to it, the nafs is going to run wild. And later on, you're going to say, why did I do that thing that I knew was not going to be good for me? What was compelling me? The temporary validation that I got from certain people who only accept me when I become that which I'm not into their company? The ease of the matter does not necessarily create the certitude or the difficulty. And we don't want to think about religion in this way, that the hardest way of doing something means that that's the best way of doing it. That's not kind of where it goes in our religion. Nor on the other end of it, that just because it comes with facilitation, that means that I should dump into it. You take some moments to rest and understand. A lot of what we talked about in relation to the doubtful matters, when we talked about an earlier hadith, in al-halal bayin wa in al-haram bayin, that indeed the permissible is, the lawful is clear and the unlawful is clear. And we talk about like the doubtful matters. That hadith ends with ala wa inna fil jasadi mudghatan idha salahat salaha al-jasadu kullu wa idha fasadat fasada al-jasadu kullu ala wa hiya al-qalb. That indeed in your jasad, your being, there's a morsel of flesh. If it is good, the entire being will be good. If it is not good, the entire being will not be good. Indeed, it's the heart. The heart is a key variable in the actualization of this hadith. When you live in a world that teaches you not to take care of your heart and teaches you also not to care about other people's hearts, the heart is going to become numb in being present now and being able to send those kind of voices, send those signals to you that, hey, maybe this isn't the thing that you should be getting into. Do you see what I'm saying? And it's imperative that you watch over your heart so your heart watches over you. And you're in a place where you do the things that nourish your heart and cultivate a relationship with it and not leave it behind. If you don't know how to do it, then you come to speak to people who do, and you seek the company of people who do. And it's not meant to be like overtly difficult. This religion has a bar of entry that's not up here, it's down here purposefully because it claims a universality. You just have to want it for yourself and know that the heart plays a key role in the determining factors of these things. There's another hadith that then alludes to this, where the Prophet ﷺ says that al-bir, righteousness, is good character, and sin is what creates doubt in your heart. You don't want to have a simplistic, trivialized understanding of this that throws your back against the wall to defend yourself when no one's not even accusing us of anything. But we fundamentally have to understand the metaphysical aspects of this, that if I am willfully engaged in the haram, that becomes an inroad now for the ease of that anxiety and agitation that makes it harder for me to have confidence in the decisions that I'm making. And why righteousness is about good character is because the state of the heart is demonstrated through how it is that we engage those that are around us. You want to know how your heart is, not just based off of how you treat your professor who's going to grade your paper, or how you treat the person who interviewed you and is going to hire you for the job, or how you treat somebody who has more authority over you. But how do you treat the people that you could get away with treating like garbage? How do you treat the people that the world around you plays a role in being complicit in the erasure of their identity? When you walk on these streets and you see the people who are sleeping in the streets, when you walk around even a place that's as affluent as the West Village, and tucked between the nooks and crannies of some of these buildings are going to be people who have slept in these areas for all kinds of amounts of time. If you walk through Washington Square Park, going up Washington Place, coming to where the bus stop is for NYU on Broadway, near the Tisch School of Arts and where there's the Cozy Soup and Burger Diner, on that street going up perpendicular or parallel rather to 4th Street on Washington Place, there's a guy who slept outside of that building at least for the last year and a half, through every season that New York experiences. The heart is in a place where it's able to guide you. When we get to a place where we understand that none of us is better than him or he is worse than us. And if your heart isn't at that place, doubt is going to stir it over and over and over. Imposter syndrome is going to sit in. I'm going to believe that I am the worst of the worst, or even worse, I'm going to, with a difficultly false sense of superiority, delusional senses of grandeur, believe that I'm better than everybody else. As opposed to just understanding I'm on my path and somebody else's, and it's a blessing that we get to share space with each other, to have kindness and compassion and generosity towards one another. Leave that which is doubtful for that which is not doubtful. Don't hang out with idiots. Don't be in places where just because you want to find a sense of belonging, you're willing to laugh at something that you know comes at the expense of somebody else's well-being. Leave that which is doubtful for that which is not doubtful. You want certitude to be present in your decisions. Can we ever say that it's wrong to have honesty and integrity be what it is that you wear as a cloak in this world? Can we ever fundamentally say that there is not certainty in the reality that just being a kind person, you cannot see kindness as a weakness, but as a strength? Can you ever say that these character values, courage as a medium between cowardness and recklessness, generosity as the medium, the middle way between miserliness and extravagance, right? So it's telling us, go with what's certain. Don't cheat. It's not going to give you success in the certitude of the akhirah. Don't gossip. Don't lie. Don't break promises. Don't be arrogant. Don't be racist or oppressive or abusive. With certitude, these are things that are not good for the heart. And then it perpetuates this cycle that it just instills that much more of agitation inwardly. So I want to take a quick pause because I know Maghrib is coming in. We can turn to the persons next to us and just share some thoughts. What are we taking away from today? We'll make a couple of announcements before we wrap up and stand to pray for Maghrib. But go ahead. What are we kind of taking away from tonight's conversation? Can you get me or a date or something? Yeah. Anything? Thanks, man.
Like we're still in separate paths. Like everyone is really based on like our parents might like whatever, like maybe not very you were given that or just having that compassion just have that understanding that or maybe your heart
What's so funny?
She just like really put it really perfectly, and then was like, "Yeah, that's like that could have been a TED talk."
There you go.
I wrote a lot of things
Okay, maybe we can hear from a couple of people before we break. So what are some of the things that we're taking away or coming up for people from today? Any thoughts? Yeah.
So me and the people around me, we're basically saying that there's actually like I believe there's an Islamic concept about this where you kind of like when you're doing something that's doubtful, and you could kind of tell that in the back of my mind like maybe you shouldn't be doing this. So a lot of the times when we're doing something, we don't actually know if it's halal or haram, but it is kind of doubtful in our head. Like if we're laughing at something at the expense of somebody else's, right? To be able to do things like that, that's where this hadith comes in to leave that which is doubtful for that which is not doubtful, right? And to understand later on that the things that actually did in the past were actually haram. Once you realize that you left the things which is haram for that which is halal, it kind of soothes the soul, soothes the heart, and makes you kind of realize that I left something which was hurting me and hurting others for the sake of Allah, doing something that actually benefits me as well. So very pretty interesting to think about.
Great. Other thoughts? Yeah.
I really appreciated the that you said about how do we treat people who we can get away with mistreating. I think that really resonated. The example you gave was like income inequality, and that's very salient and visible in New York City. What I thought about was family. I think if we're looking at somehow family was content, which are like a solid part of our life. Our angsty teenager might come out, we might yell at them, mistreat them, be unkind to our parents. And that's probably, one of the worst ways to act on kind of what you said, because we know that our families are always like, going to be there for us. They'll take our crap or whatever. And so I think that was something I'm really thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah, and that could be by extension different for different people. Some people don't have like good family, right? May Allah make it easy. We're not taught about a prophet in the Quran that doesn't have some kind of family issue. Do you know? But then there's other people that might have your back. Do you know what I mean? So why are you not letting them have your back and chasing after people that only see you through how they gain from your presence and put dollars into their pockets or all these other kinds of things, right? Like go away from what is doubtful and bring certitude in your life. Do you know what I mean? Like the people who bring positive impact into the life. Any other thoughts before we wrap up? Yeah.
I also think I feel like certainty for yourself is like something that I think like we teach you, but something that's important is also like create certainty for like people you love and like get in your life, right? And I also think the way you create certainty is like really important, like the way you care. It's not like a negative type of certainty where you impose rules on these type of people. Like Prophet Sallallahu he's like the best Muslim. He like knows Islam, like, he knows Islam like in and out. But even he feels the need to explain like the deeper meaning behind like something like you saying like the rules, I feel like you should never feel like you're better than someone else to like just like explain things to them, So I feel like creating certainty in like a positive way is like something that's like really important.
Yeah. Jazakallah khair. So just a couple of quick things before we take a pause. We do halakas here every night. We're going to continue on Mondays with this 40 hadith halakah. On Wednesdays, I do one on the Sirah. The Tuesday nights, Dr. Ali Murmur does a halakah on the Quran. Wednesdays, also one of our staff psychologists, Dr. Marwa Asar. She does something on emotional and mental well-being through a spiritual framework, which is really amazing. You should come check it out. Sheikh Fayaz Jaffer is going to be doing one every other Thursday. And there's a couple of others that we're going to be doing as well that you should definitely build into just your weekly routines and schedules, inshallah. If you're not on our mailing list or we don't have your contact info, please definitely see one of our students who are wearing these volunteer shirts. You want to stand up just so someone can see it? Yeah. So if you see someone wearing that, he's just not standing up. He like lifted his hand in this guy. Yeah, there you go. If you see somebody wearing these t-shirts, just give them your contact info and we'll get you info on all the other programs and stuff that we have going on. If anybody needs anything, feel free to reach out. But if you want to just put your chairs against the wall, we'll call the adhan and we'll stand for Maghrib, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. This is still on.